By now, you're probably an expert on the cross-sectional formulation and can explain it to all your friends. But let's take another look at it before incorporating the next component. You begin the simple cross-sectional formulation by identifying an anxiety-provoking event and then noting the interactions of your experiences of anxiety symptoms. We have found that the cognitive component is heavily weighted, such that the way you think about or interpret a situation can perpetuate the anxiety and trigger other symptoms. We spent the majority of last week talking about the impact of automatic and unhelpful thoughts. You may be asking yourself, so now what? What do I do about it? Remember that we have done 2 activities to address the physical symptoms directly. Those activities were deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. And remember that by addressing the physical symptoms directly, you're freeing up mental energy to address other types of symptoms. Also, remember that completing the cross-sectional formulation is a tool. It requires that you slow down and detangle the symptoms you're feeling. Okay, now let's focus on how to address the thoughts directly through cognitive restructuring. What we mean by cognitive restructuring is to take a different thinking approach to the anxiety-provoking situation. This involves purposefully slowing down, challenging your automatic and unhelpful thinking patterns, and giving yourself a broader perspective on the situation. This takes time and lots of practice, so be patient with yourself. Here's how it works. When you start to notice anxiety, think to yourself, stop, pay attention, and get perspective. This means that you should stop and pay attention to what's going on in your mind and body, and then be intentional about what happens next. What we want to do here is to slow down the process so that you don't get caught up in the anxiety and so that you feel more in control. The ultimate goal is for the stop and pay attention mantra to become second nature so that you use it even before experiencing anxiety. That is going to take lots of time and lots of practice. To better understand this stop and pay attention mantra, let's work through an example of alternative responses to anxiety. I want to highlight that when we're doing the alternative response, we're not just telling ourselves to think positive. You've probably heard that before, and you know it's not that simple. What we're really saying is, let's look at the situation from a broader perspective. For example, using the same anxiety-provoking situation of being invited to a party and feeling anxious about going, one of the alternative responses here is, I might still have an okay time. It's important to remember that you're probably not going to jump from one extreme, thinking you're going to have a terrible time, to the other extreme, thinking you're going to have a blast. Make sure that your alternative thoughts are realistic and believable. Don't try to just jump to the positive extreme, as this would be an example of black and white or all or nothing thinking. And as we learned last week, that's an unhelpful thinking style. Now let's review the example of alternative responses outlined here. Remember, this is the situation in which you were invited to the party, but you didn't know the student who invited you very well, and you felt anxious about going. In our cross-sectional formulation, some of our automatic cognitions included things like, people will think I'm awkward. Now ask yourself whether or not that thought is helpful or 100% accurate 100% of the time? Chances are it's not. So, what are some other more helpful thoughts? Perhaps you decide to have the thought that you might not be as socially awkward as you think, or perhaps you might still have an okay time. Now let's look at the behaviors. In the original example, behaviors were characterized primarily by avoidance, avoiding responding to the invitation, avoiding going to the party. What could you do in this situation that would be more helpful? Are there any coping strategies that you could use to help you avoid avoiding? Maybe using deep breathing or seeking support from others to manage your symptoms of anxiety? Now let's take a look at the feelings. In the original example, feelings included anxiety, shame, loneliness. If you acted or thought differently about the situation, do you think you'd feel any different? Maybe even more hopeful? Finally, let's look at the outcome of the situation. Originally, in this example, you chose to stay home from the party, watch Netflix in your room. Using these new alternatives, maybe you want the outcome to be different. Maybe you decide that you want to go to the party so that you could potentially make friends. And you tell yourself that if you feel too uncomfortable, you can always leave. Now, using the anxiety event from one of your homework assignments, come up with some alternative responses using this worksheet as a framework. If you're having trouble, ask yourself the questions listed here. These questions are intended to guide you to think of alternative responses until they become second nature, which is going to take a lot of time and practice. Go ahead and pause here before moving on to the next video and learning about some more strategies. Come up with your own alternative responses.